everybody, this is the installation video for the GEN1V differential brace. We're going to be doing the install here out of the car on this subframe that was provided by a fellow Facebook member. And that's just to make it easier to see what's going on. This is a little bit more open. The process is not a whole lot different than it would be for you underneath your car. This is just to make it easier to see what's going on. Now after you get the car up in the air and on jack stands and it's all safe and everything, do what you need to there. The only thing that you need to remove from the car is the exhaust on the driver's side of the car. Underneath your car you should have an exhaust that sits about right here on the driver's side, and then another one here over on the passenger side. Now the problem with on the driver's side is the exhaust pipe gets in the way of you being able to get a wrench in there and take all of these bolts off the side of the differential. So this one is going to have to come out of the way. That way you have full access to all your bolts. Like I said, there's nothing over here that we're going to be doing, so you don't have to worry about that side. The axles, the drive shaft, all of that can just stay on the car. Okay, so the first step is going to be to take the bolts off the differential cover on the pinion flange and then also here on the side cover. Not all the bolts come off. You can kind of see once this is installed, there is one bolt that you don't have to take off, and then on the side you can see that not all, if I come over here to the top, not all of the bolts are going to come off the side cover either. Alright, so you can see now I've got all the bolts out, both on the pinion and the side cover. By the way, you don't have to worry about gear oil coming out. There's an O-ring inside the pinion and on the side cover, and because we left one bolt here and 2 or 3 bolts on the side cover, it's held on there so that no oil comes out. This one's full of oil. As you can see, there's no leaks or anything, so you don't have to worry about that. Next, we're going to bolt up the differential brace onto the differential. Included with the kit are some differential cover bolts that are 1/4 inch longer. And that's because we're using 1/4 inch plate here on the differential brace, so you want a longer bolt so that you have plenty of thread engagement on the differential in both locations. So use the included bolts. So you can see if you had a drive shaft connected, you don't have to pull any of that off. Okay, now I've got it just a loose fit. This is just hand tight with 2 bolts. And what you want to be careful of is you don't want to put all of the front pinion bolts on and fully torque them down and seat it on, because there is a little bit of play just with the holes in the bolts, and so this can move around. And what you don't want to happen is to bolt this surface down with the differential brace pushed all the way to the right, and then you would have an air gap over here. And so when you put these bolts in, if there's an air gap there, of course you're going to be trying to bend the brace over to the differential. That's going to put a little bit of stress on everything, and you just don't want that. Or what I recommend to do is go ahead and just do 2 of these hand tight first. Actually, before I tighten these up back and forth so that I pull this down flush, just to make sure all the holes line up and everything while it's nice and loose still, I'm going to go ahead and start the rest of my bolts just to get them started. That way I know everything fits in the holes and everything and don't have any misalignment or anything. Alright, all the bolts are in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten this bolt and this bolt a 1/2 turn at a time. Okay, now that these are tight, I'll go ahead and tighten up the rest of the bolts. Use your torque wrench to torque the bolts down to the correct torque. And that's it. So the brace itself is now 100% installed. We're going to move on to installing the in-link bushing that connects the brace to the subframe bar once we get that installed. So we're going to take one of the socket head cap screws with a washer on it, put it through one of the outside slots here, and it's going to go through this slot on the bottom of the differential brace. And then once you get it in there, just slide it all the way over to the right. It'll be a little easier to get the washer. And then this is a nylon lock nut, so you don't have to use Loctite or worry about it coming loose on you. Now, once the right side is hand tight, we'll take another socket head cap screw, another washer, slide it through here, and then we'll slide it all the way over to the left. Again, just because it's easier to access all the bolts and everything. For right now, we're just going to leave everything kind of hand tight. We're going to come back and tighten everything up 100% later. Alright, so next we're going to move into just loosely connecting the subframe cross member onto the in-link piece. Then we're going to mark and drill some holes. So included with the kit, there's a 9/16 bolt, a couple of washers, and a locking nut so that you don't have to use Loctite or worry about it coming loose. Just for the video, I'm going to use a standard nut just because it's easier to thread on and off while I'm shooting the video. I'm going to scoot in here, take the subframe. Once this has been powder coated, it's a little tight, so if you've got a rubber hammer that you can use, that can help you get it on there without scratching up the powder coat. One thing just to talk about real quick is that there's a lot of adjustability here. Because there's a slot in the differential brace, this has a lot of adjustability left and right. There are slots in the in-link coupler, so there's a lot of adjustability front to back. And then if you'll also notice here on the subframe mount, there is a vertical slot for this bolt to go in. So that takes care of any vertical misalignment that you might be worried about. Okay, the next step is I'm going to crawl underneath so that you're going to be looking up at the bottom of the subframe cross member, and we're going to mark our holes and get ready to drill those. I'm going to go ahead and just move this out of the way. You can see this is a factory hole. I didn't drill this is already there from the factory, and we're going to take advantage of that. We're going to actually use that for this hole right here. Now there is one thing that we have to do. We've got to drill this hole out one size bigger. And the reason that we have to do that is from the factory, this is not a drilled hole, it's punched out. So they took the subframe and they punched the hole out, but there's still kind of a flap of material there. And that means on the back side, later when we go to put a nut on the back side, that flap of steel is going to keep us from being able to put a bolt all the way through or being able to tighten a nut on it the way we want to. So we're going to drill that out. Alright, now we'll do the other side. Alright, now we've drilled this hole out on both sides of the subframe. I'm going to go ahead and get them lined up on both sides. So just slide this over, go ahead and stick a bolt in there. It's not going to stay because don't have a nut in there yet, but we'll get to that here in a minute. I'll go ahead and get this side in. Alright. So now both sides are lined up. While I'm holding this bolt in there, I'm going to mark that hole and do the same on the other side. Alright, now that I have that hole marked, I can just slide this out of the way, take my center punch, get it lined up. Get that ready to go. Same thing on the other side. I'm going to go ahead and drill a pilot hole, and then I'll step up to the full size drill bit. Now I'm ready to go ahead and step up to the full size bit. Alright, now that I've got the holes drilled, I can put bolts in here. And then once I have the bolts installed, I need to mark where the end of the brace is sitting on either end. So I'm going to use this silver Sharpie here. That way when I take the brace back off, I can see where the edge of this metal is. The reason that we're going to have to do that is because we need to drill a hole that we don't want to be covered up by the brace. But we're going to drill a hole so that we can put the nut through the hole and then hold it down while we tighten this bolt. Alright, so now that I've got this brace kind of moved out of the way, you can see where the edge of the bracket is, and so that's where I know that I can drill a hole here and drill a hole here to fit the nut back behind there and not cover it up when this is where it's going to be in its final place. Alright, so what we need to do is drill a hole big enough for this nut to fit inside the subframe, and then that we can put the wrench, the box into this wrench, 17 millimeter, through the hole and then hold it down while we tighten it from the bottom. So I went to the hardware store this morning, got this 1-inch drill bit. I think it was like $20. That's what I'm going to use to drill the hole in the subframe. Now I'm back under the car to show you. This is not the hole that I drilled. This is actually one of the factory holes in the subframe, and I think it just kind of shows the concept before I go drilling a hole. What we're trying to do is put the hole there. Well, I can't do it on this side, but if I come to this side, the hole's big enough that I can fit the box into my wrench in there. And if you can imagine, if I were putting a bolt through here, I could hold the nut while I tightened it right there. Alright, so as you can see, I've drilled the back hole, so now I can fit my wrench inside of there. Full disclosure, I bought a 1-inch bit and I forgot to measure the diameter, I guess, of the box end of the wrench, and so it was a little too wide. It wouldn't fit inside of there at first. Luckily I have a belt sander over in the corner of the garage. I just shaved off the edges of the box end wrench. Probably what I should have done is right next to the 1-inch drill at the hardware store, they had an 1 1/8. I should have just got that one, and then I wouldn't have had to do this. But so the idea is we're going to put the box end wrench in there with the nut to hold it from the back while we tighten it from this side. What you can do to make this a little easier, when you put the nut inside the wrench, you can take a little piece of duct tape and put it across there, and that'll just kind of hold it in there just long enough for you to get it inside of there and and hold it in place without the nut going anywhere. So that's what I'll do. But with the duct tape holding the nut, make sure you get the nut in there the right way, right? You want the nylon part to be on the far side. But with the duct tape holding the nut, you can squeeze it in through the hole there, and the duct tape will hold the nut on long enough for you to get everything lined up and to get your screw in there and to get it started finger tight. And then you can get your ratchet and go ahead and tighten it all the way. Alright, so let's line this brace up. Go ahead and put our nut right side up inside the wrench. Alright, now we're ready to do the second hole. I actually discovered after I did the first one, it's just as easy, at least for getting the nut started, just to poke it in there and slide it over and hold it with your finger as it is to actually use the box and wrench. Another thing I found while I had my finger in there, remember that little flap of metal that we talked about earlier where the factory punched the hole? And I talked about this flap of metal was still attached to the hole and it was just sticking up a little bit. This was laying inside the subframe, so now you can see what I was talking about, because I don't think it showed up in the video very well that it was still attached. Go ahead and insert the nut and hold it with my finger while I Alright, there we go. This side is done. I'll go ahead and do the exact same thing over on the other side. One thing that we are going to have to do to this wrench is bend it slightly, because when you put it through the hole, it doesn't quite get perfectly flat with the nut, so as you tighten this up, eventually it gets to the point that it's just spinning, and the box end wrench doesn't have the right angle. So I'm going to put this in the vise, take a hammer and just bend it over slightly. So what I'm going to do first is measure the distance from the center of this hole to the center of that hole. Looks like it's right at 2.4 inches. So back over here on the workbench, 2.4 inches from the center of the box end wrench. I'm going to put a mark here. Doesn't have to be perfect. So you can see the mark on my wrench. I'm going to line that up in the vise. And that's going to be where I bend this wrench over just a little bit so that it gets the right angle and will hold that nut all the way down. And for that, I'll use the big hammer. Alright, so I ended up notching this just slightly with a grinder, just made it easier to bend. Now it fits in there. And let this tighten up all 4 bolts. now I've got all 4 bolts torqued down. Before I finish out here, what I'm going to do is take some black touch-up paint and just everywhere that I drilled a hole here that's exposed, I want to hit that with touch-up paint just so that we don't get any rusting or anything like that. I probably should have done that to these holes before I torqued these down so that there wouldn't be any bare metal in those holes that we had to drill. Okay, so now that all 4 bolts to the subframe connector are torqued down, I painted the inside of all those holes. I had to take this back out to do that, just so that I could get paint everywhere. Before we torque this down, we want to torque, remember, we never did torque these bolts down to this coupler yet, because we wanted this to still be flexible while we were moving things around and drilling holes and everything. So now I'll go ahead and torque these socket head cap screws down real quick. Alright, so to get this done, we're going to use a 6mm Allen wrench and a 13mm open-end box wrench just to reach in behind there and tighten this up. And then when you're done with this side, we'll just come over and do the other side as well. And that's it. We're all done down here on the bottom. Just a quick thing to note, you'll notice we have a hole right here so you can still access your drain bolt. So if you need to change your differential fluid in the future, you can still do that, no problem. This hole is there just for clearance because this boss sticks down further than everything else on the differential, so that's just a clearance hole. Didn't do anything else. But we're almost done. Okay, now that we have the coupler bolted down with the 2 socket head cap screws, now we'll just finish tightening up this bushing here in the center, and we're going to be done. And that's it. We're all done. Everything's tight. All the bolts are torqued. At this point, you would go ahead and take that driver's side exhaust pipe that you had taken out earlier. You would go ahead and slide it over the top here and reconnect it on both ends, and put the car back on the road and go have some fun. Let's talk a little bit about why the first generation CTS-V differentials tend to fail. So I have a differential here on the workbench that we can use to talk about. Ignore all the polka dots. This was the actual differential that I sent out to have 3D scanned, and it's the one that I used to design the diff brace template from it, so it still has all the little stickers on it. But the first thing that we need to talk about is what is happening to the differential every time you accelerate the car. The first thing is as the wheels spin, torque gets transmitted through the axles, into the gears, through the gears, into the case, from the case, into the subframe. If you've ever watched a solid axle car, there are some videos on YouTube that you can watch. But whenever someone with a solid axle car with leaf springs, whenever they hit the gas, you'll see the nose of the differential go up. That's called axle wrap. The same thing is happening with an independent rear suspension pumpkin as what you see in a solid axle car. The front pinion wants to go up, and it's because of the forces transmitted through it from the axles. So if we look at the differential from this angle, you can imagine that the whole diff wants to pivot about this axis, right through the center line. If you look at the back of the differential, you'll notice that we have two mounts and they're roughly centered along the center line of the differential, right through the drive shaft. What you'll notice on the front of the differential, there's only a single bolt holding it, and it's not in the center line of the axle. And that's the problem, because you can imagine that as this pinion wants to move up because of the case rotating about the axles, if you imagine this being a pivot point for the differential, if you could apply an incredible amount of force, which is what's happening with the diff, and you have this offset mount, the differential wants to twist. It wants to spin about this axis. It's kind of like if you take the old BMR subframe brace. I've had this thing around forever. I used it for a while. But as you accelerate, if this is the mounting bolt and you're pushing up here, what's happening is the entire differential wants to spin. So the front wants to spin. The rear has two mounting locations that are holding it very, very stable. And so as the rear of the differential is held in place and the front wants to twist, that wants to deform and twist the entire case. And that's what causes these things to fail. Now GM, they tried really hard to put a bunch of ribbing and webbing and reinforcement all around the differential to take that load, that twisting load, and make the differential as strong as they could. The second thing that we need to talk about is the material. The CTS-V has an aluminum rear end. Now they use a lot of aluminum in cars. It's lightweight, it's relatively strong, it's very, very cheap, but there is one bad thing about aluminum, and it's called the endurance limit. So let's take a paper clip, and we'll use this as an example. We all know you take a paper clip and you open it up, and you bend it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Eventually, you're going to cause it to break. So there's one dirty little secret to aluminum that some people might not know about. So let's compare aluminum versus steel when we talk about fatigue failure due to exceeding the endurance limit of the metal. If this paper clip were steel, for example, there's a certain amount that I could bend this paper clip and never cause it to break. As long as I stay below a certain limit, I could do this for a million years and it's never going to break. The problem with aluminum is that it doesn't have an endurance limit. In other words, it doesn't matter how little you flex the aluminum. If you do it enough times, you're eventually going to cause it to fail. It's just a property of the metal. Nothing anybody can do about it. Now let's apply that concept to the differential. Every time you hit the gas, we talked about that the differential will want to twist a little bit. Obviously, it's got a lot of ribbing structure and it's pretty strong, so it's not going to bend a lot. Any amount of deflection is eventually going to cause a failure. Now let's talk about everybody's favorite subject, which is wheel hop. Wheel hop is basically your tires have traction, then the suspension hops, and they don't have traction. And so what the differential sees is torque, no torque, torque, no torque. And if you think about what that means, this pinion will push up, and then whenever you have wheel hop, it comes back down. And then it gets traction again, and it goes up, and then it comes down. And so you're cycling the pinion up and down every single time you feel that wheel hop. Now let's talk about the front bushing. Ideally, that the bushing would absorb that torque, slow down the rotation, and reduce shock loading in the differential. The problem is, because the bushing is so soft, it just allows wheel hop to happen. Actually, I think it might even encourage it. Creative Steel and a few other companies have more solid diff bushings. they'll hold the diff more firmly and won't allow it to move up and down. I think that's a really good thing. I recommend it to anybody. So what you normally see when these diffs fail is either this pinion flange comes in half, or sometimes just the entire pinion flange will break off the differential all the way around. Usually it kind of starts over here somewhere. This section of the differential is pretty beefy, so it usually comes up around here. Now, once this comes apart, you still have the axles driving this pinion up. So the pinion gear set is going to come exploding out of the diff case. As it goes up, all this material has to go somewhere. If you'll notice, the side of the differential compared to the top of the differential, there's a lot less structure here. And so what you usually wind up with is some sort of a failure that comes up and then comes back down, but it kind of follows these lines. It really just depends on where the crack starts first. And speaking of cracks, it's pretty common that if you're going to build a high horsepower engine, when you tear the block down, one of the things you do is you deburr the block. And the reason you do this is all of this casting flash that's on an engine block, those are stress risers. They can cause a crack to happen. Once a crack starts, it's never going to stop. Eventually, it's going to cause the engine to fail. If you look at the CTS-V differential, one thing you'll notice is there's a lot of casting flash. It's everywhere. And all this casting flash is what's called a stress riser. A stress riser is a place where a crack wants to start. Now the ultimate solution would be to take this differential and, either have it sandblasted or get in here with the Dremel tool and sand all this casting flash down, reduce all of these stress risers. If there is a location where a crack is going to form because of one of these stress risers, you could get rid of that. So that's it. What did we talk about? Number one, the differential wants to twist because it's only supported by one mounting location. Number two, the differential is aluminum, and aluminum has no endurance limit. Number three, get rid of this crappy bushing. It just causes wheel hop. And finally, if you were really serious about it, you would come in here and take away all these stress risers. I've never seen anybody do that, but that would definitely help the differential. So when I designed this brace, I was trying to solve the problem from two different sides. The first thing I wanted to do with the brace itself was to eliminate the differential wanting to twist by boxing it together with 1/4 inch plate. The second thing I tried to do was to prevent the pinion from ever going up in the first place, and that's the point of the subframe crossmember. By tying in the diff brace to this crossmember, I've added a second mount, just like the back of the differential has, where there are two mounts. So now, instead of having a pivot point with only one bolt holding everything together, which allows the whole front of the pinion to twist, it's now tied in two locations. If you look at a Ford 8.8 or any of the other differentials like that, they always have the front of the differential mounted with two flanges. And they do that to prevent rotation of the front pinion.